The Nile glimmered under the burning Egyptian sun, and along its sacred banks rose temples carved with the names of gods and kings. This was the 18th dynasty, the most powerful bloodline in the ancient world. To the outside world, these rulers seemed untouchable, divine beings who walked among mortals. Gold flowed into their treasuries, armies bowed at their command, and their names were etched into eternity. But behind the polished stone walls of palaces like Amarna and Thebes, a secret darker than the shadows of the pyramids was taking root. A secret whispered only in the deepest chambers of the royal court. A secret about blood. For the pharaohs believed they were not merely kings, they were gods on earth. Their blood was said to carry divine essence, a sacred thread connecting them to Ra, the sun god himself. To dilute that blood was unthinkable, and so brothers married sisters, uncles married nieces, fathers gave their daughters as wives. It was more than custom, it was a commandment of power. Among these rulers was Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who dared to rewrite Egypt's religion. Beside him stood the legendary Nefertiti, a queen whose beauty was immortalized in stone. Together, they became the architects of a radical new faith, one God, one Son, one family. And to preserve that divine family, they turned inward, binding generation to generation with marriages that ignored the dangers of flesh and bone. At first, it seemed to work. The dynasty thrived, its wealth unmatched, its influence absolute. But beneath the golden masks and perfumed halls, the cracks were already forming. Behind the carefully painted faces of gods walked fragile bodies burdened by hidden genetic curses. From the moment of birth, heirs were marked not only by crowns, but by doom. Twisted limbs, frail immune systems, and shortened lives became the price of their divine isolation. Yet the court refused to see it. Power, once gained, is never surrendered easily, even when it destroys you from within. And then came the boy king, a fragile child whose body bore the full weight of centuries of secrets, a ruler destined to be remembered not for his triumphs, but for the curse carried in his veins. In the gilded halls of Amarna, the air was heavy with incense and whispers. The royal court celebrated its gods on earth, Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti, whose images shone on temple walls, worshipped like deities. Yet beneath the sacred murals, the dynasty was sealing its own fate. To preserve their divine blood, Egypt's royals had chosen isolation. Sisters became queens, cousins became brides, and uncles became fathers-in-law. The pharaohs believed this would strengthen their claim to godhood, but the opposite was unfolding. Each generation carried the same genes, the same silent flaws, magnified until they could no longer be hidden behind golden masks. Look closely at the evidence left behind: statues, reliefs, and ancient DNA unearthed by modern science. Akhenaten's elongated skull, once thought to symbolize divine wisdom, now reveals a likely deformity caused by inbreeding. Scholars believe he may have suffered from Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder that weakened bones and strained the heart. But the greatest tragedy would fall upon his son, the boy king known today as Tutankhamun. Once crowned, his frail body became both a symbol of divine continuity and a reminder of mortal fragility. CT scans of his mummified remains paint a haunting picture. A king whose spine curved unnaturally, whose foot was deformed, and whose immune system left him defenseless against disease. And yet, in his time, these signs were ignored. In the torchlit chambers of the palace, priests and courtiers whispered not of sickness, but of sacred destiny. Tutankhamun was the living embodiment of Ra's eternal flame, too holy to be questioned, too fragile to survive. It wasn't just the body that suffered, political stability crumbled alongside royal health. As each generation weakened, the power of Egypt's enemies grew. Whispers of vulnerability spread along the Nile like wildfire, emboldening foreign kingdoms and internal rivals alike. Still, the pharaohs clung to tradition. To mix royal blood with that of lesser mortals was unthinkable. And so the dynasty spiraled further into fragility, trapped by its own mythology. The same divine bloodline that had once made Egypt a superpower was becoming its greatest weakness, a golden prison, locking its heirs into cycles of sickness and early death. But this was only the beginning. For behind the polished facade of power, deeper secrets lay buried. Secrets of betrayal, forbidden unions, and a dynasty fighting desperately to keep its godhood intact, even as it collapsed from within. By the time Tutankhamun took the throne, the once mighty empire was no longer ruled by strength, but by whispers and shadows. The boy king, barely 9 years old, sat on a golden throne that was far heavier than his frail body could bear. Behind the marble pillars of the palace, priests, generals, and royal advisors played their own games of power, games in which the young pharaoh was little more than a pawn. The royal court hid the truth from the people. Statues of the gods were restored, hymns filled the temples, and festivals dazzled the crowds. Yet behind the carved stone walls, the air was thick with incense, conspiracy, and fear. The child king's illnesses were a tightly guarded secret. His limp was disguised under ceremonial robes. His walking stick, presented as a royal symbol, was in truth a crutch for his weakened leg. But even more dangerous than sickness were the forces within the palace itself. Factions formed around Tutankhamun's regents, I, the cunning high priest, and Horemheb, the ambitious general. Each saw in the boy's fragility an opportunity. If Tutankhamun lived, he was the rightful ruler of the gods' chosen land. But if he died, Egypt itself could be theirs. It was in this fragile balance that royal marriages tightened the noose even further. Tutankhamun's own queen, Ankhesenamun, was not only his wife, but also his half-sister, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. She was barely 14 when she became queen, bound by a destiny chosen long before her birth. And though her beauty was praised in hymns, her future was cursed by the same bloodline trap. Whispers suggest that Ankhesenamun's pregnancies ended in tragedy. Archaeologists discovered 2 tiny mummies buried in Tutankhamun's tomb, likely his stillborn daughters. The evidence speaks of a dynasty slowly collapsing under the weight of its own divine obsession. Outside the palace, chaos was brewing. Rival kingdoms watched as Egypt weakened from within. The Hittites, sensing opportunity, advanced along the northern borders. Yet inside the walls of Thebes, the royal court was paralyzed, clinging desperately to a crumbling image of perfection while the empire bled strength and heirs alike. And yet, despite the sickness, the intrigue, and the looming enemies, tradition ruled above survival. No outsider could touch the royal line. Marriages remained within the family. Power was hoarded like sacred gold. With every generation, the walls closed tighter around the pharaohs. Tutankhamun's reign was short, perhaps inevitably so, but his death would set off a chain of desperation and betrayal that would shape the final days of Egypt's most divine dynasty. The empire was a temple of secrets, its pillars cracking under the weight of its lies. And somewhere, in the silence of the palace corridors, the gods were watching. In the 9th year of his reign, at just 19 years old, Tutankhamun's life came to an abrupt and mysterious end. Ancient records are silent, but the tomb speaks louder than any scroll. Fractures in his skull, a shattered kneecap, traces of malaria. Each clue deepens the mystery. Was it an accident or murder? Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. I, the high priest and cunning vizier, was the first to act. Before the boy king's body cooled, I seized the throne and married Tutankhamun's young widow, Ankhesenamun, his own granddaughter by blood. To the priests, this was divine continuity. To the queen, it was a prison. Desperate and terrified, Ankhsenamun made an unprecedented move. She sent a secret letter to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's sworn enemy. In her plea, discovered centuries later, she wrote, "My husband is dead. I have no son. Send me one of yours, and I will make him king of Egypt. Never shall I take a servant of mine to be my husband." The letter shocked the ancient world. For the first time, an Egyptian queen openly invited a foreign prince to take the pharaoh's throne, a betrayal of divine blood. The Hittite king, intrigued, agreed and sent his son Zananza to Thebes. But the prince never arrived. Somewhere along the desert road, he was murdered. By whose hand? No one knows. Some point to Ai, others to General Horemheb. Meanwhile, Tutankhamun's burial became a race against time. His tomb, though filled with treasures, was hastily prepared. Walls were roughly painted, sacred rites were rushed. It was as if the new rulers wanted his memory buried quickly, along with the shame of his lineage. And Ankhesenamun, she vanished from history. No tomb bears her name, no record her fate. Some believe she was forced into Ai's bed, others that she was silenced forever. The death of the boy king marked more than the end of a life. It signaled the collapse of a dynasty trapped by its obsession with divine blood. Centuries of inbreeding had left Egypt's rulers fragile, airless and divided, their empire vulnerable to rivals within and without. The Hittites pressed harder on the borders. In the south, Nubian forces grew restless. At home, Horemheb gathered power, waiting for his moment. The gods, once thought to protect Egypt's throne, now seemed distant and silent. Tutankhamun's face, hidden beneath the golden mask, became a symbol of both glory and fragility, the tragic legacy of a family that worshipped purity above survival. Behind the dazzling treasures lay a simple truth. The empire's lifeblood was slowly poisoning itself. And in the silent Valley of the Kings, under layers of sand and time, the boy king slept. The death of Tutankhamun was not the end. It was the beginning of a darker chapter. With the boy king gone, Egypt faced a throne without an heir, and the fragile royal line, weakened by generations of inbreeding, began to crumble. High Priest Ai crowned himself pharaoh, draping the golden cobra crown upon his brow. But his rule was brief and haunted by whispers. To the priests, Ai was a guardian of divine continuity. To the generals, he was a usurper. Among the shadows of Karnak's towering columns, a new power was rising, the ambitious general Horemheb. Horemheb, once Tutankhamun's loyal commander, had waited patiently as chaos consumed the court. He knew Egypt needed a leader, unbound by the cursed blood of Akhenaten's house. When Ai died mysteriously after only 4 years on the throne, Horemheb claimed power, purging the temples and erasing the names of the heretical pharaohs from history. This was more than revenge. It was rebirth. Horemheb declared the gods had abandoned the old royal bloodline and placed his faith in a new divine order. Statues were smashed. Reliefs were carved over. Entire dynasties were wiped from memory. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, all vanished from the official records as though they had never existed. But no decree could erase the truth. Centuries of genetic isolation had left Egypt's divine rulers fragile, sickly, and vulnerable. Their obsession with purity became their undoing. Bones unearthed from royal tombs tell the story their scribes would not. Deformities, congenital diseases, and weakened immune systems. Even the gods' chosen pharaohs could not escape the price of playing gods themselves. Beyond the palace walls, the empire strained. Hittites challenged Egypt's power in the north, while Nubian tribes grew stronger in the south. The once unbreakable kingdom stood at the edge of collapse. Its wealth dazzled the world, but its throne, the very heart of Egypt, was hollow. And yet, buried beneath the desert sands, the past refused to stay silent. Thousands of years later, archaeologists uncovered the tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun, his golden mask gleaming like the sun. Behind the beauty lay secrets the ancients tried to hide. The tangled web of power, betrayal, and blood that brought Egypt's mightiest dynasty to its knees. The divine bloodline ended, but its echoes shaped history. Tutankhamun's tragic reign became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even gods can bleed and empires can poison themselves from within. Egypt would rise again under new rulers, but the golden age of the Amarna line was lost forever, swallowed by time, ambition, and a fatal devotion to blood.